Hi guys, it's KD here and welcome to another video just talking to you about 1v1 Huns unit stances and how you can go about best using those in a 1v1 setting. So just taking a group of paladins here, just talking about aggressive stance. So my hotkey for aggressive stance is set to A. I find that that's really nice and simple. I think it could even be the default, just a really nice and simple way of using that stance. And it's going to be your most frequently used stance when you're playing 1v1 Huns. A couple of things to note about disadvantages of using aggressive stance when you're actually playing 1v1 is that if you are patrolling in and you're pressing that A key just to make sure that they are on aggressive stance, one thing is that they can sort of lure off in sort of different directions as they engage the enemy, and they can kind of travel for quite a long time before sort of perhaps coming back into their original patrol line if that's how you've got them set. So that's just one thing to be really mindful of when you're using aggressive stance. The other stance that I wanted to talk to you guys about, which you're rarely going to use when it comes to melee, is stand ground. When I say rarely, there are odd exceptions to using stand ground with melee units. Perhaps, for example, you really just don't want them to engage something right in front of you while you're trebbing something, close units or close structures that perhaps aren't engaging. But overall, you don't really want to worry too much about that. That's kind of more, later down the line. So keeping it nice and simple, stand ground. As a general rule of thumb, you're going to want to use that on ranged units. So we're talking about cavalry archers, but we're also talking about other civilizations as well. Things like that incorporate siege onagers, scorpions, so that'd be heavy scorpions, and also things like unique units that are ranged like axemen and mangadai, for example. These are all ones where you can use stand ground effectively. So stand ground can be used offensively and defensively. So it can be used in a patrol line, so I can switch to stand ground here, and what it means is that your cavalry archers are going to concentrate their fire in a much smaller space, which means that they're going to try and take out units sort of one at a time rather than kind of spreading out and softening their impact by hitting multiple units that might be in front of them. So for example, if this pack was an enemy, they might look to shoot the first 5, whereas if you were to patrol in on stand ground, they're likely going to hit the closest one that's to them. But it can also be used defensively in the respect that you can use stand ground both standing still, so up against structures, between structures, up against wood, for example, so backing up against forests, but also up on top of hills as well, so it can be used in that regard too. And you can also use stand ground both left and right. I appreciate I got my left and right wrong there, but left and right, and also backwards as well. If your enemy was right here in front of you, you can patrol stand ground backwards, and then what they'll do is stop and concentrate that fire back. As I mentioned, it can be used on other civilizations as well. Siege onagers, scorpions, for example. These are also ones that can be used, and that's really effective. To use siege onagers and siege scorpions, heavy scorpions in this way, because they will really fire down on one spot. Siege onagers, just with the one exception, I appreciate I'm talking about 1v1 Huns here, but with the one exception that you do just want to make sure that melee don't get right up in their face and they're still set on stand ground, because that can be a little bit messy. So you really want to kind of alternate stances a lot. This is kind of the key message I wanted to get across to you guys, is that for the most part you want to be using defensive stance, you want to be using aggressive stance, and you want to be using stand ground. So anyway, that brings me into defensive stance, actually, which is one of those things that you're not really going to want to worry about too much when it comes to ranged units, but around melee units, yes, you are. So say, for example, you were wanting to defend this very key point here, and you just did a very short patrol line, left, right, backwards, right in front of you, doesn't really matter too much, and you set them to defensive stance and did the same for the paladins. What it means is that they're going to kind of act a little bit like boomerangs. They're going to make sure that that's the spot that they're attempting to defend, and if they did kind of waver off, so say for example they saw a unit and thought, I'm going to go and attack him, they'll go so far and then they'll ping back to the original spot where they were before, and this has some great advantages. Now it is probably the least used defensive, the least used stance rather that you're going to have, just simply because defensive stance is very kind of situational, more so than stand ground and aggressive stance, because really you're going to be using stand ground quite a bit with your ranged units in 1v1 Huns, but defensive stance is just one of those ones that just comes and goes depending. But if you want to defend one particular spot, then you can. And there's not really much for me to say about this. You know, if you're grouping up, close to a castle or a particular part of your economy, or defending these cavalry archers with these paladins, thinking rule of thumb that it's really around melee units. So just to recap, aggressive stance for all units. When it comes to stand ground, you're thinking ranged units, and when it comes to defensive stance, you're thinking, it's purely defensive on melee units, really, and not worrying too much about anything else. But there's not much to say about it. But that being said, defensive stance does actually have really good offensive use as well. So if you were going in and charging up against your enemy, and you were doing some raiding, for example, and you wanted to attack in a larger density within a very small proximity and just kind of leave them doing what they're doing for a minute, rather than chasing off every unit that comes near them, or chasing off villagers, or indeed if it was a team game and they're getting right into the enemy's trade, rather than just running off and chasing trade carts forever and ever until they finally get a kill on them. In fact, what they'll do is stay in a very close proximity, in a larger density, and they'll do more damage. So if you're putting 40 paladins in against the enemy's trade at the back of their base, so say for example this here was a trade line and you didn't see this wood here, and you wanted to make sure that you did maximum damage with a 360 degree in this spot, then you would firstly spread formation just to get the most distance that you possibly could, and then you patrol in a very short area on defensive stance. And what that means is that if, for example, I don't know, these cavalry archers were trade units that were coming in trying to get to the market in the corner here, as they're coming through, they're going to get blocked by all of these paladins together. And what it means is that if any of these trade carts whatsoever actually get through, then they're actually not going to get chased indefinitely. They're only going to get chased to about probably where this relic or just beyond is, and then they're going to ping back. So these trade carts are now damaged. They're coming up here. That's if all 4 made it through. I highly doubt, maybe only 2 made it through, and then they're coming back damaged, and they're just going to get hit by this wave of paladins. But the alternate of doing that is that you just kind of get this kind of going on in a team game, where you just get a paladin just forever running up, and then he'll eventually get one hit on the trade cart, and then he'll be chasing it down again, and it's incredibly annoying. And I appreciate that's not really anything to do with 1v1 Huns, because you don't obviously build markets and trade within the game, but it kind of echoes a really good point here, guys, is that if you're running into your enemy's economy, or if you're just trying to defend one particular spot, using defensive stance and making use of your units in a closer proximity at a larger density is really, really beneficial. So that's really all I wanted to cover off, guys. There is a couple of extra things that I just want to note just before I conclude, just around defensive stance, just a couple of honorary mentions. You can use defensive stance for siege rams, and you can, sorry, I said defensive stance, I mean stand ground, my apologies, stand ground you can use for siege rams, and the reason being is that, say for example you had some siege rams and you were running in against your enemy. Have you ever seen that kind of awkward detachment where a ram gets shot and starts wavering off in different directions, or it gets hit by a paladin and looks like it's spazzing out, like it just doesn't know what to do? Well, set it to stand ground and get them to pile in. They will plow through any enemies hitting them right directly in front of them, and that's great because if you're patrolling them and you don't see a structure you want to attack, like a castle for example, then you can just roll on through until you see it, and you can either set it back to aggressive stance, or you can just plow into that castle and just do as much damage to it as you possibly can. But that is one resolution to kind of solving that. It's quite an annoying one, and it is something that I would say is a good takeaway for you guys to bear in mind. So that's kind of all I wanted to cover off in this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. This is just talking about stances in 1v1 Huns. I'm going to be following this up again with more videos, as I keep mentioning, so please subscribe, and I will be back with you guys again shortly. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, please comment below, and I hope to see you guys again soon.